Commander Vostek of the Xanthari Dominion stood at the front of Lecture Hall Omega-7, all four of his arms clasped behind his chitinous back, surveying the assembled cadets with the kind of expression that suggested he had just bitten into something sour. The hall itself was a monument to galactic military superiority, with holographic displays flickering across crystalline walls, each one showcasing legendary battles from the past 3,000 cycles. Rows of specialized seating accommodated everything from the gelatinous blorp students in their containment spheres to the towering six-legged Krinth warriors who needed reinforced benches just to sit without causing structural damage. This was advanced combat theory. Level 9. The most prestigious, soul-crushing, ego-shattering course in the entire Galactic Military Academy. Only the best of the best even got through the door, and most of them washed out before midterms. Vostek had personally seen to that for the last 47 cycles. Thank you very much. Attention, he barked, his translator device rendering his clicking mandibles into 47 different languages simultaneously. The room snapped to order, sort of. Well, most of it did. In the third row, wedged between a crystalline shardborn who kept refracting light in annoying directions and a four-armed Hectarian nervously polishing his ceremonial blade collection, sat Cadet Brianna Cross. Human. From Earth, that backwater planet in the unfashionable end of the Orion Spur that had only joined the galactic community 6 cycles ago, and honestly most species were still debating whether that had been a clerical error or someone's idea of a practical joke. She was, predictably, not at attention. Instead, she had her boots propped up on the desk, one hand supporting her chin, the other tapping some kind of rhythm on her datapad. Her expression screamed cosmic-level boredom, like she had seen this all before and found it deeply underwhelming. Vostek's secondary eyes twitched. Humans. They had been nothing but problems since day one, showing up to the academy with their bizarre skeletal structure, their disturbing forward-facing eyes, and their complete lack of respect for protocols that had been established millennia before their species even discovered fire. The Galactic Council had insisted on integration, cultural exchange, blah blah blah, but Vostek knew better. These creatures were soft, weak, raised on a garden world with embarrassingly mild conditions, 1.0 gravitational constant, a stable single sun, barely any radiation. Pathetic. Cadet Cross, Vostek said, his voice dripping with enough venom to kill a Thoraxian battle beast. Perhaps you would grace us with your full attention, unless, of course, human military discipline is as primitive as your technology was a mere decade ago. Several students made sounds approximating laughter, though the blorp student just gurgled, which could have meant anything really. Brianna slowly, deliberately, looked up from her datapad. Her face held the kind of smile that did not reach her eyes, the kind that suggested she was 3 seconds away from saying something that would get her written up for insubordination. "Oh no, sir, you have my complete attention," she said, her voice sweet enough to cause diabetes in species that processed sugar. "I was just reviewing the homework on theoretical Deathworld survival. Fascinating stuff. Really, got my heart rate all the way up to, about 62 beats per minute. The Hectarian next to her made a choking sound. 62 beats per minute was barely above resting for a human, and everyone in the room knew it. Vostek's mandibles clicked in irritation. Today, he decided, was going to be very educational. For everyone involved, but especially for the smug little mammal in row 3. Vostek activated the main holo display with a flourish of his upper right manipulator appendage, and the entire front wall of the lecture hall erupted into a 3-dimensional rendering of what could only be described as Hell's Vacation Home. Volcanic vents spewed toxic gases into a rust-colored sky. Rivers of molten rock carved through obsidian plains, and the atmospheric readout showed temperature fluctuations that would make a thermal-resistant Kryn whimper like a hatchling. "Behold," Vostek announced, his voice taking on that particular tone of sadistic glee that all career military instructors seem to perfect around their 20th cycle of teaching. "The gauntlet, your final examination for this course." A collective gasp rippled through the lecture hall. One of the blorp students actually destabilized, partially losing cohesion for a solid 3 seconds before pulling themselves back together. The shardborn next to Brianna began emitting a high-pitched frequency that the translators mercifully chose not to interpret. "The scenario is simple," Vostek continued, clearly enjoying himself now. "You will be dropped onto designation Infernus 7, a Class 12 volcanic death world located in the Scorch Nebula. Surface temperature averages 430 degrees Kelvin in the shade, assuming you can find shade. Atmospheric composition is 63% sulfur dioxide, 22% carbon dioxide, and trace amounts of things that will dissolve your respiratory systems. The local fauna consists primarily of Category 9 apex predators, including the delightful magna worms, which are exactly as fun as they sound. A holographic magna worm materialized above the display, all serrated teeth, armored scales, and bad attitude. It was roughly the size of a small spacecraft, and looked like it had been designed by a committee of sadists, with unlimited budgets and anger management issues. Your objective, Vostek said, zooming the display to show a barren plateau surrounded by lava flows, is to survive for 72 standard hours at this location. No weapons beyond basic survival gear. No communication devices. No extraction until the timer expires or you trigger your emergency beacon, which I should mention results in automatic failure and a mark on your permanent record that will follow you to whatever insignificant posting you end up assigned to for the rest of your mediocre career. The Hectarian cadet had gone completely pale, which for his species involved his skin turning an alarming shade of purple-gray. One of the insectoid vril students in the back row actually fainted, which sounded like someone dropping a bag of sticks. This examination has a historical passage rate of 11%, Vostek added, because apparently the room was not terrified enough yet. Most species require extensive genetic modification and 3 months of specialized training just to breathe the atmosphere without immediate organ failure. You will have 72 hours. I expect most of you to last approximately 9. Question. Dead silence. The kind of silence that happens when everyone is too busy contemplating their imminent doom to form coherent thoughts, except of course for Brianna Cross, who raised one hand lazily, like she was asking about the location of the nearest bathroom. Yeah, quick question, she said, her tone conversational, almost friendly. Is there like actual wildlife we are supposed to avoid or just the magna worm things? Because the briefing mentioned Category 9 predators plural and I am just trying to get a sense of the ecosystem here. Every head in the room swiveled to stare at her. The Shardborn's light refraction went completely haywire. Did you not comprehend the survival parameters, Cadet Cross? Vostek said slowly, each word precisely enunciated. This is not a research expedition. This is a test of your ability to not die horribly. Brianna shrugged. Right, no, I got that part. I am just wondering if there is anything actually dangerous or if this is more of a camping situation with better ambiance. The lecture hall exploded into chaos. The combat simulation arena occupied an entire sublevel of the academy, a massive spherical chamber capable of replicating any environmental condition short of a black hole. And honestly, the engineers were working on that last bit. Vostek stood in the observation deck surrounded by the remaining cadets who had not been selected for the first wave of testing. Below them, through reinforced transparent steel, 20 cadets materialized on the simulated surface of Infernus 7, each one appearing in a different zone of the hellscape. The environmental hazards kicked in immediately. Temperature sensors spiked into the red zone. Sulfurous clouds billowed across the landscape. A volcanic vent erupted approximately 30 meters from a Krinth cadet, who immediately deployed his regulation thermal shield and began calculating the optimal retreat vector using standard galactic military doctrine. Chapter 7. Subsection 14. Paragraph 9. Observe, Vostek announced to the watching students, gesturing at the main display which showed all 20 camera feeds simultaneously. Cadet Thrall executes a textbook environmental assessment and tactical withdrawal. This is proper protocol when facing overwhelming environmental hazards. On screen, Thrall had already activated his portable atmosphere processor, established a defensive perimeter and begun constructing a regulation emergency shelter using the prefabricated components from his survival pack. By the book. Profession. Exactly what 4,000 cycles of military evolution had determined to be the correct response. Then camera feed 7 switched to Brianna Cross, and Vostek felt something inside his thorax clench in a way that the Academy medical staff would probably call concern, but he preferred to classify as intense irritation. She had landed in arguably the worst possible zone, a narrow ridge between two active lava flows, with a magna worm nest visible approximately 200 meters to her east. The smart play, the only play according to every military manual ever written, was to activate emergency shielding and relocate immediately to more defensible terrain. Brianna looked around, stretched like she had just woken up from a particularly nice nap, and then proceeded to do something that made 3 different species in the observation deck make sounds of absolute horror. She took off her helmet. Emergency beacon activation in 3, 2, muttered a Vril cadet in the observation deck, already pulling up the failure documentation forms. Except Brianna did not immediately collapse from atmospheric poisoning. She wrinkled her nose, made a face like she had smelled something unpleasant but not expected, and then tied the helmet to her belt like it was a minor inconvenience rather than critical life support equipment. "What?" Vostek said flatly. "Is she doing, sir?" "Her biometrics show elevated respiratory function but no signs of distress," reported the monitoring technician, a six-eyed observant whose entire species existed specifically to notice details that others missed. "Her oxygen saturation is, this cannot be right, actually improving." On screen, Brianna had found a sharp rock and was now doing something incomprehensible with her uniform sleeve, tearing off a strip of fabric and wrapping it around her face like some kind of primitive filtration system. Then she spat on the fabric, actually spat on it, with her own biological fluids, which caused the Blorp student to make a sound like a drain backing up. That is not in any manual," stammered the Hectarian cadet, his blade collection forgotten in his lap. "That is not even theoretically sound. The moisture will evaporate instantly in this heat. The fabric has no filtration properties. What is she doing now?" What she was doing now was collecting volcanic ash in her empty water container, mixing it with some kind of plant matter she had apparently found growing between rocks that should have been too hot to support any life whatsoever, and creating what looked like a primitive paste that she proceeded to smear on her exposed skin. Is she making sunscreen?" asked a Shard-born cadet, their light pattern flickering in confusion. "From volcanic byproducts and toxic flora." Meanwhile, on Feed 3, a properly trained Xanthari cadet had just triggered his emergency beacon after a minor equipment malfunction. Standard procedure. No unnecessary risks. On Feed 12, a Blorp student was carefully maintaining safe distance from all thermal sources per Regulation 17 Alpha, and on Feed 7, Brianna Cross had just walked directly up to a pool of geothermal runoff, tested the temperature with her finger, made an approving noise that the audio pickups registered as, "Oh nice hot springs," and began collecting the water in a container she had fashioned from her discarded helmet padding. Vostek's mandibles had not stopped clicking for the past 3 minutes. It was starting to hurt. "She is treating a Class 12 Deathworld simulation," he said slowly, each word fighting its way past his disbelief, like a spa retreat. On screen, Brianna had now located what appeared to be a cave formation near the lava flow. Instead of avoiding it per standard protocols, she walked directly toward it, examining the entrance with the casual interest of someone browsing real estate options. She kicked a rock into the opening, waited, listened to the echo, and then nodded to herself like she had just confirmed the square footage met her requirements. "Cadet Threll has successfully established base camp according to protocol," the monitoring technician reported dutifully. "Estimated survival probability, 73%. Cadet Cross has, she has moved into a cave of unknown depth in a seismically active zone and appears to be, sir, I think she is humming." She was absolutely humming. The audio feed confirmed it. Some kind of repetitive human musical expression, completely off-key, echoing through what was supposed to be a life-threatening survival scenario. Vostek had trained soldiers for 47 cycles. He had seen cadets from 400 different species face impossible odds. He had witnessed acts of heroism, cowardice, brilliance and stupidity in measures that defied statistical analysis. He had never, not once, seen someone treat a Category 9 threat environment like a mildly interesting camping trip. "Increase the difficulty," he said quietly. The monitoring technician's 6 eyes widened. "Sir, the scenario is already at maximum recommended levels for cadet training." "Then," Vostek said, all 4 arms crossing simultaneously in a gesture that conveyed exactly how far beyond caring about recommendations he had traveled, "I suppose we are about to exceed recommendations. Activate hazard protocols Omega through Zeta. All of them. Simultaneously." This was going to be educational indeed. The simulation's environmental controls whined in protest as the difficulty settings climbed past levels that had never been tested outside of theoretical worst-case scenarios. The monitoring technician's manipulators hovered over the emergency shutdown protocols, just in case everything went catastrophically wrong, which given the current trajectory seemed less like a possibility and more like an inevitability. On Feed 3, Cadet Threll's regulation shelter immediately began showing structural stress as seismic activity quadrupled. His face, visible through his helmet's camera, displayed the particular expression of someone realizing they had made a series of choices that led to this exact moment of regret. His emergency beacon activated 7 seconds later. Automatic failure. He would live, but his pride would require significantly more recovery time than his body. "Cadet Threll has been extracted," the technician announced, marking the failure on the main board. Remaining cadets 19. Feed 9 showed a blorp student whose containment sphere had cracked under the thermal stress, their gelatinous form desperately trying to maintain cohesion as they slapped the emergency beacon with a pseudopod. 18 cadets. Feed 15 captured a vril cadet, making the fatal mistake of seeking shelter under a rock formation that chose that exact moment to demonstrate why seismic instability was called instability. The beacon activated automatically when her vital signs hit critical thresholds. 17 cadets. Vostek watched the feeds with grim satisfaction. This was proper military education. Learn your limits. Respect the protocols. Understand that survival meant knowing when to wait. What was happening on Feed 7? Brianna had emerged from her cave carrying what appeared to be some kind of crystalline formation that she had apparently just broken off the cave wall with a rock. She was examining it with the focused interest of someone who had found something genuinely useful, which made absolutely no sense because it was just a mineral deposit from a, oh no, is that? The Hectarian cadet whispered, his voice barely audible over the sounds of multiple emergency beacons activating across the other feeds. Is that a silicate-based water filtration matrix? The monitoring technician zoomed in on Brianna's hands. She had smashed the crystal into smaller pieces and was layering them inside her makeshift water container with the volcanic ash paste and some kind of fibrous material she had stripped from the heat-resistant plants. The result looked like something a primitive civilization might create if they had absolutely no access to proper technology and far too much time to experiment with terrible ideas that somehow worked anyway. She is purifying geothermal runoff using rocks and plant matter, Vostek said, his voice completely flat. She is hydrating herself with volcanic byproducts in an environment specifically designed to make hydration impossible without advanced filtration technology. Brianna took a drink from her creation, made a contemplative face, shrugged, and took another drink. The biometric readout showed her hydration levels actually improving. Feed 4 winked out as another cadet failed. 16 remaining. Then, the magma worm appeared on Feed 7. Because apparently the universe had decided that today was the day Vostek's understanding of military doctrine would die screaming. The creature erupted from the lava flow like a nightmare that had taken physical form specifically to fail cadets and ruin simulation equipment. It was 6 meters of armored rage, its sensors immediately locking onto the only life sign in its territory that was not currently fleeing or activating emergency beacons. The observation deck went silent. This was it. The moment where the cocky human would learn that confidence without capability led to very educational, very brief lessons in mortality. Brianna looked up from her water container, saw the magma worm, and did something that would later be described in the Academy's incident reports as inadvisable to the point of requiring new categories of inadvisability. She waved at it, actually waved, like she was greeting a neighbor across a fence. The magma worm paused, which magma worms were not supposed to do because they were rage-fueled killing machines without pause functionality. It tilted its massive head regarding this tiny creature that was not running, not fighting, not doing anything that fit into its predator-prey recognition software. Brianna reached into her survival pack, pulled out a ration bar, the kind that every species in the galaxy agreed tasted like compressed sadness and regret, and tossed it toward the magma worm. She is feeding it, breathed the shardborn cadet. She is attempting to domesticate a Category 9 apex predator with military rations. The magma worm sniffed the ration bar, made a sound that the audio pickups registered as somewhere between confused and curious, and ate it. Then it looked back at Brianna with an expression that, if you were feeling particularly generous with your interpretations, might have resembled expectation. She threw another ration bar. The magma worm caught it midair, crunched it down, and settled onto its haunches like a pet waiting for more treats. This is not happening, Vostek said. This violates every known principle of xenobiology, predator behavior, and common sense. Feed 11 failed. Feed 6 followed seconds later. The difficulty increases were claiming cadets faster than the monitoring technician could document the failures. 14 remaining. 13. 12. Brianna, meanwhile, had apparently decided that her new best friend needed a name, because the audio feed picked up her saying, "Okay, buddy, you are officially Roger now. Yes, you are. Yes, you are a good Roger." Roger the magma worm made a rumbling sound that might have been contentment or indigestion. Either way, when another magma worm appeared from a different lava flow, Roger positioned himself between it and Brianna, making aggressive territorial displays until the newcomer retreated. "She has bodyguard," a vril cadet said weakly. "She has convinced an apex predator to provide security services in exchange for ration bars that none of us even want to eat." The seismic activity increased again. Vorstek had authorized it personally, determined to find the breaking point of human arrogance. A massive tremor split the ground near Brianna's cave, releasing a plume of toxic gas that sent the atmospheric toxicity readings into ranges that required scientific notation to express properly. Brianna looked at the gas plume, looked at Roger, looked at her cave, and made a thinking face that suggested terrible decisions were forming behind those forward-facing eyes. She grabbed several of the heat-resistant plants, wove them together with a speed that suggested she had done this approximately 1,000 times before, and created a dome-like structure that she positioned over the gas vent.
What is she?
Vorstek started to ask, but then he saw it. The plants were absorbing the toxic compounds, metabolizing them through some kind of chemical process that was probably fascinating to xenobotanists and absolutely infuriating to military instructors. The gas that emerged from the other side of her plant dome was still warm but significantly less lethal. She had built an air purifier, from weeds, in a volcanic hellscape, while being protected by an apex predator named Roger. Feed 18 failed. Feed 2 followed. 10 cadets remaining, and 9 of them were currently clustered in the observation deck's failure documentation queue, their emergency beacons creating a symphony of shame. Only 1 cadet remained in the simulation, sitting cross-legged next to her domesticated murder beast, drinking filtered volcanic water, breathing air she had purified with aggressive landscaping, apparently comfortable in an environment that was actively trying to kill everything else. The observation deck had gone beyond shocked silence into something that resembled existential crisis. Several cadets were quietly questioning whether their expensive academy educations had taught them anything useful whatsoever. Vostek's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. He had moved past irritation, through disbelief, and landed firmly in the territory of needing to completely re-evaluate his understanding of survival theory. "Sir," the monitoring technician said carefully, "should we continue escalating?" On screen, Brianna was teaching Roger to fetch rocks. The magma worm was participating enthusiastically. "No," Vostek said quietly. "I think we have learned quite enough for one day." The simulation powered down 20 minutes later, not because the 72 hours had elapsed, but because Vostek had seen enough and his thorax was starting to develop what the medical staff would definitely classify as stress-induced inflammation. Brianna materialized back in the lecture hall looking slightly sweaty, smelling faintly of sulfur, and wearing an expression that suggested she had enjoyed a mildly pleasant afternoon rather than surviving what was supposed to be an apocalyptic nightmare scenario. Roger, sadly, had to stay in the simulation. Brianna looked genuinely disappointed about this. Vostek descended from the observation deck with all 4 arms held rigidly at his sides, which anyone familiar with Xanthori body language recognized as the physical manifestation of someone barely maintaining professional composure. The other cadets parted like he was radioactive, which, given his current mood, was not an inaccurate assessment. "Cadet Cross," he said, his voice tight enough to strangle smaller life forms. "My office." Now, the walk to his office was conducted in the kind of silence usually reserved for funeral processions or the moment before someone gets spectacularly fired. Brianna followed with her hands in her pockets, occasionally glancing at the various military achievement hollows lining the corridors like she was browsing a particularly boring museum. Once inside, Vostek sealed the door, activated the privacy fields and turned to face her with all 4 arms crossed in what was universally recognized as the "explain yourself before I lose what remains of my sanity" posture. "I need," he said slowly, each word measured and precise, "an explanation, a detailed, comprehensive explanation for how you, a human from a species that has been spacefaring for less than a decade, managed to not only survive, but apparently thrive in a simulation that has broken trained soldiers from civilizations that were conquering solar systems before your ancestors discovered agriculture." Brianna blinked. "Oh, which part specifically are you confused about?" "All of it." Vostek's voice climbed several octaves, his translator struggling to convey the sheer exasperation. "The atmospheric exposure, the improvised filtration, the domestication of a creature that exists specifically to be undomesticatable." "Right. Okay." So Brianna leaned against the wall, clearly organizing her thoughts. "First off, the atmosphere thing. Yeah, it was pretty gross, not going to lie. But I grew up near a place called Yellowstone. Sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide. We get that from geothermal vents all the time. You get used to it. Well, not used to it, but you learn to deal with it. My dad used to take us camping near the hot springs, and let me tell you, compared to that smell, your simulation was practically floral." Vostek's mandibles opened, closed, opened again, No sounds emerged, and the water filtration Brianna continued, warming to her topic. That is just basic wilderness survival. Charcoal for absorption, silicates for mineral filtering, plant fibers for particulate matter. We learn this stuff in like basic outdoor education. Sometimes the power goes out. Sometimes you're stuck somewhere without clean water. You figure it out. Your planet, Vostek managed, has regions where the power goes out. Oh yeah. All the time. Hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, floods, blizzards, heat waves, solar flares occasionally. Infrastructure is pretty good now, but you still need to know survival basics just in case. The Xanthari commander pulled up his data pad with one trembling manipulator and began scrolling through Earth's planetary classification data, information he had never bothered to examine closely because why would anyone care about the environmental details of a garden world? Except the data that materialized in front of him made absolutely no sense whatsoever. Your planet, he said faintly, is classified as a Class 7 Deathworld. Yeah, I think I saw that somewhere, Brianna said. Seemed a little dramatic, honestly. Dramatic. Vostek repeated. Your planet has active tectonic plates on 70% of its surface. Your atmospheric oxygen content is high enough to be classified as a fire hazard. You have weather systems that generate electrical discharges measuring billions of volts. Your oceans contain thousands of species with venom capable of killing creatures 50 times your size. Your gravity is 1.2 galactic standard. Your rotation creates temperature variations of over 50 degrees within single-day cycles. And according to this, your magnetic field fluctuates enough to occasionally disrupt electronic equipment. Oh yeah, solar storms, Brianna nodded. Those are pretty annoying. Messes with GPS sometimes. Vostek scrolled further, his eyes widening with each new data point. Your planet experiences regular bombardment from space debris that your atmosphere only partially mitigates. Your sun exposure causes cellular damage that you have to actively protect against. Your local fauna includes creatures massing over 100 metric tons that live in your oceans and creatures with jaw strength capable of crushing metallic alloys that live on your land masses. You have parasites. Hundreds of species of parasites. Some of them live in your drinking water. Well yeah, that is why you filter it, Brianna said reasonably. Were you not listening to my explanation about the silicate matrix and the magna worm? Vostek continued, apparently on a roll now, his voice climbing into ranges his species typically reserved for declaring war or announcing catastrophic news. You domesticated it with food offerings, Commander. I grew up on a farm. You want to make friends with an animal, you feed it. Cows, horses, chickens, dogs, cats, occasionally the raccoons that got into the trash. Same principle applies. That Roger guy was just a big lizard when you get down to it. Big lizards like food. Simple, simple, Vostek said. You compared a Category 9 apex predator to raccoons. I mean, raccoons are pretty vicious when they want to be, Brianna said defensively. One of them bit my cousin once. Needed rabies shots and everything. What? Vostek asked, dreading the answer. Is rabies? Oh, it is this virus that makes mammals go crazy and aggressive. Fatal if untreated. We have vaccines for it now, but you have to get them pretty quick after exposure or you die screaming. Nasty stuff. The Xanthari commander sat down heavily in his chair, which groaned under the weight of his sudden existential crisis. Your planet has diseases that cause madness and death from animal bites. And you just accept this as normal? Well, we try to avoid getting bitten, Brianna said. But yeah, stuff happens. That is why we have hospitals. Vostek pulled up more data, his hands moving automatically while his brain tried to process the nightmare information appearing on his screen. Earth's medical history, plague outbreaks, viral pandemics, bacterial infections, parasitic infestations, fungal contaminations. The list went on, and kept going. How? He whispered. Are you not extinct? Brianna shrugged. We adapt. We are pretty good at that actually. Kind of our thing. The official simulation results appeared on the Academy's main network, approximately 3 hours after what would later be referred to in hushed tones as the incident that made Commander Vostek question everything. Brianna Cross, human, Earth, Orion Spur, had achieved a perfect survival score, not just passing, not just acceptable, perfect. 100% across every measurable category, plus several categories that the evaluation software had to invent on the spot because her performance had exceeded parameters that the original programmers never imagined would be relevant. Environmental adaptation, perfect. Resource utilization, perfect. Threat assessment and mitigation, Perfect, with a special footnote about unconventional methodology that the software seemed almost offended to have to acknowledge. Physical resilience. The monitoring systems had flagged this one 3 times because surely there was a sensor malfunction. But no, also perfect. The Academy's Administrative Council convened an emergency session within the hour, which was unprecedented, but then again so was everything else about today. Vostek found himself standing before the council chambers presenting his case to a collection of high-ranking officers from a dozen different species, all of whom looked at the simulation data with expressions ranging from disbelief to the kind of concern usually reserved for discovering that your assumptions about the fundamental nature of reality were catastrophically wrong. Commander Vostek, said High Chancellor Kreth, a distinguished shardborn whose light patterns flickered with barely contained alarm. Are you seriously proposing that we revise our entire survival training curriculum based on one human cadet's performance? Yes, Vostek said simply, because what else could he say? I am also proposing mandatory orientation seminars about Earth environmental conditions for all Academy staff and students. We have been operating under the assumption that humans are fragile, soft creatures from a garden world. This assumption is not just incorrect, it is dangerous. Dangerous how? Demanded General Thorax, a Krinth war hero whose species prided itself on physical superiority. Dangerous, Vostek said, pulling up the compiled data on the main display, because we are training them using protocols designed for species from stable, predictable environments. We are teaching them solutions to problems they have already solved using methods we cannot comprehend because their entire evolutionary history is a masterclass in surviving things that should not be survivable. We are essentially teaching fish how to swim while congratulating ourselves on our superior aquatic knowledge. The council chamber fell silent. On the display, a recording of Brianna befriending Roger played on loop, because sometimes you needed visual evidence that reality had become negotiable. Motion approved, High Chancellor Kreth said quietly. Effective immediately. All combat simulation difficulties will be recalibrated. All training materials will include comparative analyses of Earth survival conditions, and someone please figure out how to update our recruitment materials, because if this is standard human capability, we have been criminally underutilizing them. 3 days later, Vostek stood once again at the front of Lecture Hall Omega 7, but the atmosphere had changed considerably. The cadets sat in attentive silence, no longer confident that their expensive educations and superior evolutionary adaptations meant anything when compared to a species that apparently regarded Deathworlds as mild inconveniences. Brianna sat in her usual spot, 3rd row, looking exactly as bored as she had before, except now the other cadets were watching her with the kind of wary respect usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. Today, Vostek announced, his voice carrying none of its previous condescension, we begin a new unit on comparative survival methodologies. We will be examining Earth-based techniques and their applications to galactic military scenarios. Cadet Cross has graciously agreed to provide practical demonstrations. Brianna raised her hand. Vostek braced himself. Quick question, sir, she said, that same dangerous sweetness in her voice. Are we going to run the simulation again? Because honestly, that was a pretty nice vacation compared to finals week. Good cardio, decent scenery once you got past the whole fire and brimstone aesthetic, and Roger was excellent company. 10 out of 10. Would recommend. Several cadets made strangled noises. The Hectarian student's blade collection clattered to the floor. It was not, Vostek said carefully, designed to be a vacation. Oh, totally understand that, Brianna nodded seriously. But compared to the camping trip my family did in the Australian outback last summer, you know, with the heat and the venomous everything and the drop bears, your simulation was honestly pretty tame. More controlled, fewer things actively trying to kill you. Way fewer spiders. Drop bears, Vostek repeated, making a note to look that up later and already dreading what he would find. Yeah, they are the worst, Brianna continued. But hey, that is Australia for you. Most dangerous continent on Earth hands down. I am really grateful I grew up in North America. Way safer. Mostly just had to worry about bears, mountain lions, wolves, venomous snakes, poisonous plants, flash floods, tornadoes and the occasional wildfire. You know, normal stuff. The lecture hall had gone completely silent. Vostek's mandibles had resumed their clicking, but this time it was less irritation and more a physical manifestation of his brain attempting to process the statement safer continent in the context of everything else he had just heard. Cadet Cross, he said finally, you are saying that you are from one of Earth's less dangerous regions. Oh yeah, definitely, Brianna said cheerfully. I mean, we are not exactly Antarctica, which is a frozen wasteland that will kill you in like 15 minutes if you are not prepared, But we are way better off than Australia, where even the plants are venomous and the wildlife has actively declared war on human survival. North America is pretty chill, relatively speaking. A Blorp student destabilized completely and had to be carried out by medical staff. Vostek pulled up the planetary data again, scrolling to Earth's continental breakdowns, reading through the environmental hazard reports for each major landmass, watching his understanding of human resilience expand into territories that required new frameworks of comprehension. Right, he said eventually, his voice distant, already composing the updated training protocols in his head. Class dismissed. I need to file some reports. Many reports. Possibly also a revised threat assessment for the entire human species. As the cadets filed out, Brianna paused at the door, turning back with a grin that was absolutely calculated to cause maximum psychological damage. Hey Commander, she called out. Next semester, if you want to make the simulations actually challenging, maybe add some mosquitoes. Those things are the real killers back home. Malaria, dengue fever, yellow fever, Zika virus, West Nile. Now that is a proper survival scenario. She left. Vostek sat alone in the empty lecture hall, pulled up Earth's data on mosquitoes and vector-borne diseases, read for approximately 45 seconds, and then very carefully closed his datapad before he learned anything else that would require him to reevaluate his entire career. Outside, in the corridors of the Galactic Military Academy, humans continued to be terrifyingly competent at things they considered normal, and the rest of the galaxy slowly began to understand that Earth had not joined the galactic community as pupils seeking knowledge. They had arrived as the professors nobody knew they needed, teaching lessons in survival that most species had never imagined requiring. And somewhere in the simulation archives, a program named Roger waited patiently for the next time someone would bring ration bars and call him a good boy, because even apex predators appreciated proper manners and snack-based friendship.